Hello and good morning and welcome to this Sunday's sermon. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, why has John got this hat on? Well, there is a reason. I wonder whether you have an article of clothing that reminds you of a particular event, a particular occasion. Now for me, it's this hat. Just over 3 years ago, as part of my sabbatical, I did an 800-kilometre walk across northern Spain. The name of that walk is the Camino de Santiago. And this is the hat that I wore every day for 30 days as I walked, day after day after day. It's something that I'd wanted to do for a while. I'd heard stories from other people who had done the walk. I'd read books about the walk. I'd also seen this film. Seen it and been inspired by it. It's a film called The Way. And it tells the story of 4 very different people who each meet whilst walking on the Camino. And they're each doing it for very, very different reasons. Now you might have noticed that the film isn't called The Camino. It's called The Way. And the reason for that is that this long distance walk has another name. It's occasionally called the Way of St. James. And the reason that it's called that is because the place where the walk finishes, which is Santiago, is reported to be the final resting place of St. James. Hence, the Way of St. James.
Our reading this morning comes from Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 to 28. From that time on, Jesus began to say plainly to his disciples, I must go to Jerusalem and suffer much from the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. I will be put to death, but 3 days later I will be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. God forbid it, Lord, he said. That must never happen to you. Jesus turned around and said to Peter, Get away from me, Satan. You are an obstacle in my way, because these thoughts of yours don't come from God, but from human nature. Then Jesus said to his disciples, If any of you want to come with me, you must forget yourself, carry your cross, and follow me. For if you want to save your own life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. Will you gain anything if you win the whole world but lose your life? Of course not. There is nothing you can give to regain your life. For the Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each one according to his deeds. I assure you that there are some here who will not die until they have seen the Son of Man come as King. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
So, I wonder, if I asked you what were the first followers of Jesus called, I wonder what answer you would give. I think a lot of you would give me, well, what is the obvious answer? You'd say, well, they were called Christians, weren't they? No, not to start with. The first followers of Jesus weren't known as Christians, they were known as followers of the Way. And there's a clue in the book of Acts. Remember when we hear about Saul, and Saul is persecuting the early church. Saul goes to the head priests and he asks for a letter to give him permission to go to Damascus. That's why he has his Damascus Road experience. But in that letter he asks for permission to go and capture, not Christians, but followers of the Way. Followers of the Way. That's what the first members of the early church were known as. And it wasn't until a little bit later in the city of Antioch that they started to be known as Christians. Okay, another question. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, gosh, John, I didn't tune in this morning to have to do all this work. But I want to know, how might you get from wherever you are sat watching this video sermon to the middle of Nottingham? How might you get there? I suspect some of you, in answering that, might give me directions. You might say, well, John, if you go out to the house and you go to the end of the street and you go down this road and then turn here and across the roundabout, and when you get to the traffic lights, that'll be one way of telling me how I could get to the middle of Nottingham. The other way might be telling me the different ways I can get there. I could walk, I could cycle, I could ride a bike, maybe I could jump on a tram, or even go by train. Thinking about the way. Well, that can give you information about direction. It can give you information about geography. But it can also give you information about how we might actually get from A to B. All of which brings me round to the reading that you heard a little bit earlier from Kath. A reading that happens at a really crucial point in Jesus' ministry. You see, up until that point, Jesus has been travelling in the northern region of Galilee. He's been travelling from small towns, little villages. He's avoided going to the big cities. Only now, at this point, Jesus changes direction. He's no longer going to remain in the north. He's going to go another way. Geographically, he's going to turn south. And he's going to start heading towards Jerusalem. And his disciples, well, they too have to head in the same way. They too have to go south, heading to the capital city. That's the geographical way that Jesus and his disciples are going to move. But remember, I said when you talk about the way, it has another dimension. Not only are the disciples going to change direction, but now they're also going to change the way in which they act. They've been learning from Jesus. They've been watching Jesus. They've been imitating Jesus. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that if Jesus got on a boat, they got on a boat. If Jesus jumped on a donkey, they jumped on a donkey. No, what I mean is that as they travelled with Jesus, as they watched, as they listened, as they studied him, they looked at the way he dealt with other people. They looked at how he related to them and his relationship with God. And that way, or maybe those ways, heading towards Jerusalem and doing the things that he did in the way that he did, well, that's going to get both Jesus and the disciples into trouble. Jesus is going to rub up against the religious authorities of the day, the chief priests, the elders, the scribes, the Pharisees. He's going to annoy them so much that, as Jesus says to his disciples, he's going to undergo great suffering. They're going to try him. They're going to find him guilty. They're going to condemn him. And they're going to kill him. He also says to the disciples, oh yeah, and by the way, I'm going to be raised from the dead on the third day. But I'm not sure the disciples actually hear what Jesus says, or if they do, they don't understand. The penny doesn't seem to drop. But if they'd thought about it, right from the start of his ministry, when he faces off against the devil in the wilderness, Jesus has been tempted. Tempted as to the way his ministry is going to be carried out, the way his mission is going to be fulfilled. Is it going to be to satisfy self? or to transform the lives of others? Is he going to be in flashes of power simply to impress? Or is he going to use that power to heal and restore? Is it going to be served, or in the service of others? Well, according to Jesus, if we really want to be followers of his, if we really want to walk in the same way, in what we say, in what we do, in who we are, then we too are going to have to go where we rub up against the powers that be, the authorities of the day, those with prestige and privilege and positions of power. We're going to have to stand up for the weaker members of society, speak out for those who are voiceless and oppressed. We're going to have to be ready to follow Jesus by putting aside self for the sake of others, by being willing to paraphrase words we normally hear in a communion service, to have our bodies broken, to have our blood shed, to be ready to lay down our lives for others, by being prepared to pick up our cross, to walk in his way, in all that we do, in all that we say, and in all that we are. Amen.